Thanks for having me. Travis saw, well, we'll get into that. But as Travis said, okay, now it won't advance. Yeah, that's right. Oh, now it did. I made it active.
Go back.
So please ask questions, interrupt. I want this really to be a conversation. This isn't about me here lecturing to you. I think Travis said it. We were talking about how learning photography and how the club now a lot of people are online because you can be online after COVID, and I've looked at it in my career. And I found that I learned so much. I mean, we didn't have Zoom, right? So you have to go to a workshop, you have to go to a lecture. And what I learned sort of in the break, before it, afterwards, having a drink, was by far more information actually sometimes than I got actually in the lecture. So please interrupt, ask questions. Travis had my bio up there, just so to just go over just a little bit. So my background, I went to school for photography, and coming out of school, I wanted to be I wanted to work at Life magazine and be a documentary photographer, and Life magazine folded as I started school. And I saw a video going on, we were watching Vietnam that at night, and I just said to myself, the whole paradigm of long-term projects, still photos were over. But I saw also I wanted to help people with my photography. I had this, the ideal of the 20-year-old. And so I found medical photography, which then a few years later led me into what's called ophthalmic photography, which is photographing inside the eye, in and around the eye. And I won't go into all of that, but it's all about doing photos to diagnose and help the doctors treat patients and save their vision. And I always thought, what better way for a photographer to help people than with their vision? So that's what I did. That was one half of my life. It continues to be half of my life. But at the same time, I did my own personal fine art photography. I decided to go sort of on this parallel path, and sometimes I had to put more time into my ophthalmic photography. I got involved in professional organizations and speaking and things like that. And at other times, I was able to do more of my own personal work. But I continued doing that to this day. All self-assigned projects that I do. I decided I didn't want to be working doing that type of photography and having somebody tell me what I should go and photograph, or photographing and then having some editor go through my images and decide what was going to be shown. So that was just a decision I made. My work is represented here in Atlanta at Lumiere Gallery. So again, there's part of my life that's selling prints. And I'm also a realtor. So I do that again because it's not something I have to do full time, 7 days a week. But it's just one of my other things in terms of how do I make money? How do I make a living? How do I work?
Overachiever.
I don't know if I'm an overachiever, but it fits, right? Having some control over my life. Travis saw this when I announced. So I do workshops, and my wife and I purchased a home on the Isle of Skye in Scotland 11 years ago. Last month was 11 years ago. And ironically, what we purchased was a primary school and schoolhouse built in 1893. So this actually is sort of the size and shape of one of the schoolrooms. And there's another one that's a little smaller, and then there's a schoolmaster's house. So, it sits on the ocean, and a long story. We can't, we've done a lot of work on restoring it, but it's an incredible. For the first time we went there in 2008, and I saw the light the first morning I got up, and you had the weather coming in across the Atlantic and the clouds and the sky and everything changing and the beautiful scenery. It was like, I wish I could live here. And, about 5 years later, we did. So anyway, that's how I got here is with this image I'm thinking of right here on Sky, and I do a workshop, and there's still a spot open for that in this coming October. But Travis and I were talking before this, and being someplace where you can constantly go back to places, sort of photographing in your own backyard, even though this backyard is like 5,000 miles away, but we're there for a couple months. I mean, really gives you an opportunity, as opposed to early on in my career, I'd make a plan to go to, the Southwest and photograph. And at first it was like, how many spots can I hit in a week, right? And then I sort of learned, well, maybe I should just go to one spot and learn about it and photograph and make photographs that actually said something. And now with this, when we're there, I said to Travis, we could be working in the yard doing something, and it's sort of light's not very good, and all of a sudden, the weather changes, and it's just incredible light, and you just get in the car and go, and that's a luxury that most people traveling, including myself, don't have. So we don't do a lot of traveling anymore, even though both of us have traveled around the world because we spend our time in Sky. And I said I also do workshops. For 10 years, I did a workshop up in Buffalo, New York at 12 acres, 2.5 million square feet of abandoned grain elevators. And you'll see why that happened. It was a result of another project I did. But I did that workshop for 10 years and then published a book, had about 300 people that had come to the workshop. And then we sort of selected 60 photographers, 60 images, wrote and it was my first experience in learning how to publish and print a book. I've been fortunate with that work that I did at Silos City to have this published in Lenswork magazine. So how many are you familiar with Lenswork? If To me, that is the one photo magazine. There's nothing in it. There's no advertising. There's nothing in it about cameras. It's all about publishing photographers' work and them talking about their work. And they're just beautiful photographs. So if there's one magazine I'd suggest thinking about subscribing to, it would be Lenswork. And these are just a couple of the images. Travis said he didn't want me to show a bunch of my pictures during this, just to do it all this, but I had to throw in some so you at least get some idea of what I do in black and white. And how, I mean, that's sort of, I see in black and white. That's what I like to say, is that I do make color images, but I actually see in black and white. And this is just some work from these grain elevators during these workshops that I did. Typically, I don't photograph a lot during the workshop. I'm there for everybody else, but there are times when I actually get to photograph. So this is going to be less, what I want to talk about is less about process and more about the approach. And what I mean by that is, Travis has talked about him when he learned photography. So show of hands, how many people have done black and white film photography, processing and printing? Okay. Then, and this is a rhetorical question, how many of you have made color prints from those black and white negatives? I know the answer. It's nobody. And I think that is, in essence, the key to what I want to talk about tonight, is that looking at that process of doing black and white and what we've changed into with digital. So I do workshops. At the end of every workshop, I get people on Zoom and we do what's called an image share. You're talking about doing a critique. But we talk about the photographs we made, helping one another. And this is the one thing that comes up like 90% of the time. Somebody will say they were photographing and they made some images and they were looking at it, say in Lightroom in color, and it just wasn't working. So to make a good photo, they decided, I'm going to make it black and white. And I think a lot of photographers do that. What I'm trying to pound into your head today is that you need to be intentional when you're doing black and white photography, because this doesn't work. If it wasn't working as a color image and you're not looking at it as a black and white image, it's not going to work when you convert it, right? It's really changed our approach now, though, to the medium. I mean, there's people here, I don't know how many people on Zoom have started doing photography using film. That is a completely different process, and it makes you think completely differently than I'm out photographing and I get back, I hit a button, convert to black and white. When we think about other artists, they create in the medium in which they intend their audience to interact with it. So, a painter working in color, right, doesn't paint with oils, acrylics, watercolors, whatever you have, doesn't do a painting with the intention of then converting it to black and white, right? And now there are people that work in black and white painting, and there are people that sketch and right, but it would be like somebody, to me, it would be like somebody doing writing country western music and then sort of hitting the button to call it jazz. I mean, there's an intention there of what they're doing. Well, I don't care what it is, sculpture, writing a book, whatever it is. And this technology now that we're using with photography for us has changed that paradigm. So I threw in this. If I don't know how many of you know the painting, "The Woman in Gold" by Klimt, right? And if you look at this, it's just this stunning, stunning painting, right? But when he painted it, he didn't then have a button to hit it and change it into the woman in gray, right? I mean, but we do that. We have we have we have these images like this, and then all of a sudden are like, well, I think it'll be better in black and white because we haven't thought about it and approached it when we're out there thinking I'm going to do it in black and white. Just to throw in a couple of images, yes, I do color photography. These are just some images from sky. I mean, and I truly, I mean, I believe that while most of my work is black and white, because that's how I see, that's how I react, that's how I interact, that's my palette. I also know that there are images, things I respond to that have to be in color. And, these are just a couple of them. Again, these are from the Isle of Skye, but these just would not work in black and white. I mean, especially this one with, the rainbow, right? So I am sensitive to that. And while I look at it all the time in black and white, there are times that I just can't help but making a color image. This would not come across the same way in black and white. So, to think about this is to make really impactful black and white images, you have to be intentional. You have to look at it. It's about light and contrast, right? It's seeing, and people say, well, what do you photograph? What do you, I tell everyone, I photograph light. And I mean, that sounds trite because we all photograph light, but what I mean is I'm looking at and seeing light and then using what I'm seeing to put something into it. And you probably can tell by looking at my photographs, I like very strong, directional, contrasty light. Other people like very soft, but that's the way I see, and those are the types of photographs I make, and that I want to say something with. So I'm just a few months short of 70. So born in 55, and when I think, before even Travis asked me about this, I would talk about, I mean, we didn't have a color TV until I was a senior in high school in 1973. Okay. So it was all black and white, whether it was broadcast in color. But I mean, the fact that I was born in 55 And then as I got to be like 1961, first movie I remember seeing on the big screen was The Longest Day in black and white, right? The TV, all of a sudden, movies from the 40s and 50s were being broadcast on. If you look at those movies, they were done in black and white, but if you look at the way they're lit, it's just absolutely incredible. Now it's just sort of action and animation and whatever in a movie, but you look back there and there's direction to the light. They're using it to create mood and to draw your eye into something and create a three dimension on the screen. And so I I saw that. And one of my favorite programs was Route 66. Two guys driving a Corvette around America. Gee, where did I get that idea about I wanted to go and travel in America in a car and photograph, right? And of course, the Twilight Zone was wonderful. But I mean, this is it. This is what we did. We watched the TV. You're Travis making fun of himself coming up here and advancing the slides. Back then, I was the remote control. My dad would say, "Hey, Mark, change the channel to channel 6." That was my first job as was a remote for a TV. But that I believe really had an impact on me. I mean, and we can't, it's like that was then, this is now. But for me, in my visual awareness, I think that played a role in it. I mean, the other thing is that my first camera, this real high tech Ansco Cadet 2 with one shutter speed and two, it's either color or black and white for it changed the aperture in there, right? Well, we didn't have a lot of money. And so my parents were like, they bought me black and white film. And then I started making a lot of photographs of the black and white film. Then they told me I couldn't make any more photographs because it was costing too much money to get the film processed and printed, right? But I mean, again, when I started, that's what I was doing, was making black and white photographs. I wasn't making color. And then, at the end of high school, I had the opportunity to process and print some film just before I left high school. And I mean, that was magic. It was, I remember getting into the dark room at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 4 o'clock, my teacher's knocking on the door telling me I have to leave. And it was like an hour went by rather than all that time. But what was really magical to me was watching the print come up in the developer and going through that process, exposing it, having that, and I've said in other lectures, it's like you never hear anybody talk about that magical moment when they hit print and that print comes off the inkjet printer. It doesn't have the same feeling. And I'm not trying to say this in terms of, oh, this is bad what we're doing now. I'm just saying it's different, and I think it in some of us, and for me specifically, it helped shape the way I do my photography. And I think that we've lost some of that now. When you look at, we had to make a decision. What kind of film are we going to use? What was the speed of the film? Was it fine grain or not so fine grain, right? What developer are we going to use? We had these combinations of developer that we had to think about to maximize the image quality. And then you have to go through and actually process this. And if you screwed it up, it got screwed up. And the other thing is, you'd be out there photographing for 2 weeks out in the Southwest, and you had no idea what you got in your film, right? You weren't looking at the back of a camera. You were reacting and making images, and you only learned about it. So again, in some ways it taught us, it wasn't better, but it taught you in some ways maybe how to look more carefully. And then you only had so much film, so you only made so many exposures, right? And so you went through this whole process of actually to get a print to actually show, right? I was involved with Atlanta. I was the executive director of the Atlanta Photography Group for a while. And one of the things I loved about it was we had this monthly critique. And it wasn't a critique of, oh, let's go and photograph this. The critique was bring any of your images you wanted that you were doing and just show it to us. And we talked about it. They could be contact sheets, draft prints of something, whatever it was. And we had conversations. And then I started my own business. I wasn't involved with it for a while. I came back just when digital was starting. And, I mean, back then you had to actually, like, you get the film, process it. You had to make the prints. There was a time lag between there. And I went to the first one, and somebody, it was on Wednesday night, and somebody said, and they had 16 prints up there. And they're like, well, I just went photographing this Sunday, and these are my 16 prints that I made from Sunday afternoon, right? So there was not even any time in terms of, I'm a big believer. Again, this goes even I use all digital now. I don't look at the back of my camera when I'm photographing. To me, looking at the back of the camera is editing. It's not making photographs. I know what I'm going to get. I don't have to worry, is the exposure good? Is it in sharp focus? Whatever it is. So I get into the zone of making photographs. And then when I get back, I go through and look at them because I was used to probably sometimes waiting a month before I saw my contact sheets of what I had photographed on the last trip or whatever it was I was doing. So I think there's sometimes that time, giving yourself. Some photography editor looked at my work and he wrote about it, and he said that I approached it with a critical distance, and that really resonated with me because the distance that I approach it is a time distance. It's really, I think, easy to fall into, gee, we just went to the waterfalls to photograph and we had 4 days of fun and it was great. And therefore, and we hiked and we did all this, and therefore these images have to be good because I felt good about making them. And so they have to be. And to me, I'd rather put a distance between that, not make decisions based on how I felt or was it a good time, but really looked at it and say, does this image work? Because ultimately, that's what I want to be able to figure out. I learned basic photography with a 4x5 view camera. Loading these film holders in a dark room, going on a trip and only having so many film holders with shots, black and white film, and so you have to be judicious in what photographs you made. You just couldn't go and fill up a 1 GB card with images. You had to, because not only did you only have so many then when you got back, you had to process all of them. For me, we learned Ansel Adams was just coming into his own when I was in school, and I wanted to be Ansel Adams. I looked at his black and white work. It was incredible. But yeah, after a while, I figured out some kid from the south side of Milwaukee wasn't going to be the next Western landscape photographer in California. But what really kept me and educated me and pushed me forward in my photography were these 3 books. And I think these 3 books that are still available, even though they talk about film, you can read them and apply them to digital. And I mean, he was an educator, and he talked about, how to process a negative and what to look for. Those things, we're doing them digitally now, but this, it's a different way of doing them. We're not doing them chemically, but the thought is still the same. So I spent a lot of time. Of course, I spent so much time learning the zone system and making these prints that were just technically perfect, boring photographs that didn't say anything. Because I was so enamored with the process. I thought if I did the process, if I did it like Ansel did them, well, they're going to be as good as Ansel's, right? I didn't figure out back then that I had to have something to say with my photographs before they were going to actually say something to somebody else. At the time I was in school, because I started with a 2-year associate degree in applied science and photography. They taught us to be photographic problem solvers. They taught us how to get a job as a photographer. They didn't teach us anything about art. We weren't talking art. We weren't looking at it as art. We were looking at it as, can you do this? Can a problem come up that you need to solve photographically? And can you get a job being a photographer? But even then, I mean, the photo magazines of the time, Popular Photography, and a few others, where I was introduced to W. Eugene Smith's work. And I think that to me was was one turning point. And when I looked at him, his work, his long-term projects, it was all black and white, and how he put himself into the project, that really made an impression on me. If you want to see an interesting movie, there's one with Johnny Depp called Minamata, which is this photograph right here is from that series where he went to photograph the effects of mercury poisoning on this village because this chemical plant was dumping mercury into the bay, and these people were eating it and having deformed babies. That was his last big project, but it's really a good movie. And the other photographer for me was Henry Cartier-Bresson with The Decisive Moment. There's a time when everything sort of comes together in the frame that makes the image what it is. So those two, with the basis of Ansel Adams in black and white, really started me on my way of doing my own photography. Here are just some images. These are images I actually made while I was still in school in 1973, 74, 75, using a view camera. That personally I still think work now. I still show them as my work. I did a project where I photographed the south side of Milwaukee, and I'd carry this view camera around down the street and meet people and make photographs. I also did a project where I would photograph every Christmas morning. I come from this huge Italian family, 37 first cousins. Just so Sunday, Christmas was just crazy, but like a lot of places, Sunday morning or Christmas morning, I should say, not Sunday morning, is quiet. So I'd go out and make photographs just to see who was there, different than what was going on. So. And I still do that to some extent now. This was an image that we had to do a self-portrait, and for me, I looked at it and I saw that white wall, and that's how I felt being in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I loved it. I loved my family, but I knew that I wasn't going to stay there. I felt out of place. And again, to me, it still works. So let's talk about seeing in black and white. So I've got this around my neck. It's the same thing I'm holding there in the upper left-hand corner. It's a black and white viewing filter. And for probably the first 10 years of my photography, I didn't go out photographing without this around my neck. I looked at everything. Now, does it convert it like a black and white print? No, but it converts it to the point, the scene, the color scene, so that you can get an idea of what it's going to look like in black and white. So, I mean, you can find these. The one I have is a Zone 6 black and white viewing filter. You can find them on eBay. It's a Ratton number 90. So if you were, there are other companies that sell them, but this was, everybody during that time was walking around with this because it really taught us how to look at how the film we were using was going to respond to this color scene that we were looking at. And so, you look at the scene, here it is, and then this is what you get, right? So that's how I started all the time. I wouldn't make exposures without first looking at it through this and then determining what it was that how I was gonna photograph it. I looked at it to say, there's all this color, but if I'm gonna convert it and it's gonna be abstract and black and white, it helped me actually compose. That I needed to get closer? Did I go farther away, up, down, whatever it was I had to do? And then being in ophthalmology, understanding that the human eye has this 24-stop dynamic range, right? We're out there looking with our eye, but our film has and it probably depends on what camera, what sensor, but about a 12-stop dynamic range. So how do we take that, if we're thinking about black and white, and compress that into something that we can print on a black and white paper? Back then, it's silver gelatin. And how did we do it? We did it by changing development. right? We'd look at something and say, oh, the highlights are too bright. And if I give it this exposure, now I've got to decrease my development on this. And that's why you used sheet film, because you could individually process every sheet of film. Now we can process every raw file we get any way we want to. But back then, but it's the same thing now. We, many of us, we used a spot meter, and this was, Zone 6, a photographer named Fred Picker had a company that view camera you saw, that wooden one, that was a Zone 6 view camera. Then the Zeus Zone 6 viewing filter. Then this was a Honeywell Pentex spot meter, but he would take it. You could see how he put the zone dial on there, but the meter was calibrated to how black and white film sees light. Because we got to remember that black and white and color film see light differently. And black and white film is basically just sensitive to blue light, and then they put dyes in it to actually make it panchromatic black and white film, right? You see the old photos done in the Civil War, and the sky is always white because everything's done by blue light. So this gave a way of even getting more control. Of course, I thought that the more control I had, the better my photographs were going to be, right? But it took me a while to figure that out. But, here's a scene that I photographed in South Georgia. And, you can go through and look at the different values, and that's what I would do. What area do I want to have black with detail? What area do I want to let go completely black? If it's a white area and it's over 255, well, now I'm going to have to take that film and reduce my development to get detail there. Because if I gave it regular development, it'd be too dense. Conversely, if there was something that didn't have enough range, I could extend the development. But we're doing that now with digital. But in my head, and what I learned by doing this is what I've applied now in digital. The problem is this, right? We're out there, and I know there are cameras that allow you to make an exposure, and you can have some custom thing that you can see it in black and white. And I think that's probably, if you're learning about this and doing it, that's a good thing to do, is to start looking at things to say, how is this going to reproduce in black and white? Again, I don't do that, but I think if I was learning and teaching somebody how to do good black and white photography, that's what I would have them go out and do. Just make black and white images. Of course, most of the cameras, even though it shows black and white, it's still going to give you an RGB raw image, right? But it'll give you a better idea how you might want to do something with it once you get it into, say, Lightroom. Like I said, the sensors, even color sensors, are only color sensors start out as a black and white monochrome sensor, and then you can see here in this thing on the bottom right, they put little color, red, blue, or green color filter over that sensor, right? And so, and when we make a color photograph, the three pixels touching one another, red, blue, and green, create a data point, and it's called interpolation. Now, it's the same thing when we want to convert it to black and white. We're still using those 3 pixels, those 3 colors that are now being converted to black and white. Where a monochrome sensor has, it's pixel to pixel. So in a sense, your image is actually I don't know if it's a correct term, but it's going to be probably a little bit sharper because you're not doing any interpolation. You're using all your pixels to make the image, right? So again, for me, what that meant was I've been using a Leica rangefinder camera since 1983. That's pretty much for most of my work. That's all I've used was a rangefinder camera. Of course, I was using film. So when the first Leica rangefinder full frame 35 millimeter size sensor came out, it was color, and that's what I bought because I was already using digital. I wanted to use the Leica. And so again, it had this pattern, this bear pattern of pixels, and I was capturing color raw files, but in my head, I was thinking of them as black and white. And one advantage of that is, so I also now have a monochrome Leica. And the monochrome Leica I probably use for 98% of my photography, okay? And so what do I have to do? If I want, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, I use color filters over the lens to darken or lighten things, right? If I put a green filter on it and I'm out photographing kudzu, the kudzu is going to be lighter because it's going to pass more green, right? If I put a red filter on it and the sky is pure blue, it's going to darken that sky almost black, right? But those are things that I had to do back in the film day. I'm still doing them now on in the monochrome camera. Now, I don't think there are many manufacturers out there that make monochrome cameras, and they're expensive. But I'm just saying, in my life, I have the monochrome where I do most of my photography. I've got the color for those times when I might need it. But one great thing, we'll look at it, is with a color image, as you convert it to black and white, you can start moving those color sliders and in many ways get the same effect that I'm getting by putting a filter over the lens of my monochrome sensor, right? Matter of fact, you have this whatever, 8 or 10 sliders, and so you can move all these things. I did a photograph in Utah of this old weathered farmhouse, white fence, green tall grass, and lilac bushes, right? And it was just amazing as I converted it to black and white, and then used the sliders and looking at those lilacs and how I can make them dark or light, or I mean, I can adjust it to it where it felt good for me. And the sky was blue, and so I mean, there's a huge advantage to capturing in color, and then converting black and white. But if you approach it of looking at it as I'm going to make black and white images with this. So my workflow is really, really basic and simple. I don't have some fancy software. I don't have plugins. I do basically what I used to do in the darkroom. So this gentleman, even though it looks like he was a model and I photographed him, was actually, my wife and I were driving up this tall part of sky, and he was there with his friends who were visiting, who happened to be from Atlanta. But this is the way the guy dresses, right? And so his friend wanted to make a photograph of him, and I said, "Could I make a photograph too?" Right? So I did, and at the time I didn't have my monochrome camera. I just had the color Leica, so I captured it in color, right? And one of the things with my Leica is that my lenses are so old, they don't electronically connect with my camera. So it doesn't give me like, oh, you're using a 35 millimeter Summicron f2, and you made this exposure at f whatever it is, right? So when I bring it into Lightroom, the first thing I do is I go to the lens correction section, I hit remove chromatic aberration, and enable profile connect corrections, and then I go in there and I've got to find Leica M Summicron 35 millimeter, and I've got to put that in there. So that's what I do. Now, again, for me, I might be on Sky and make 500 to 750 exposures in a month. Put them into Lightroom, and I look through there and pick, there might be only 15 images that I actually think are good enough for me to actually just work on. So I don't have this workflow where I ingest everything and have all this stuff automatically applied to it. I just don't do that because I'm going to treat each of those images individually, including this. The only thing it puts on automatically is my copyright information that gets put into the image file. So I get this, I start, Adobe's set up that workflow. So, I start up on top and I look at the exposure and I start to play with the exposure. Look at the highlights. I'm looking at my histogram, and is it way over on one side? And am I, clipping some information over here or over there? And so I'm constantly going back and forth. It doesn't take a long time, but I'm making these adjustments as I'm going, and they're just little adjustments. And sometimes I adjust one thing, do something else. That means I got to go back to the one I just did and adjust it a little bit more. But those are my adjustments. I don't have anything set. When for me, one of the things that really makes an image stand out is the clarity button. I have a friend of mine who calls it the make better button, right? Because it takes the midtones and it just gives them this boost. What I'm trying to do is look at my monitor and get that at the point to see where I feel what's on that monitor represents what I was feeling or I want that photo to look like. And it's got a three-dimension to it, even though it's a two-dimension image. I use sharpening. I tend to stay around, again, I did some work for Adobe and they're like, around 60 on the sharpening, keep the radius, detail, and masking where it's at, and then just play with the sharpening a little bit. And I've never had any problem just by doing that. I know way back when Photoshop came out, we would like sweat bullets. How much sharpening are we going to give it, and what's it going to do? I also use, now that they have dehaze, I mean, with an image like the one you're going to see with the background, I mean, it literally cuts through the haze of the atmosphere and gives you detail where before it's just totally blown out. And I do use some of the post-crop vignetting. I mean, again, my training when I was making prints, and this is because when you develop negatives, a lot of times the edges of the negative, because of your shaking, got developed more. You'd always go in and sort of burn in the edges, make them a little darker. And I just got in the habit of doing that. So I make the corners of my images just a little darker. Not that you can tell, but when you look here and you see what it started with and what it ended with, and I mean, if I could look at that and say, well, that's a nice photograph. And I could keep it like that, but I was looking at it when I was making the exposure as a black and white image. So, hitting the black and white button, well, all of a sudden you hit the black and white button, it changes, even though you've done it in color, it changes a lot of what you've done. It's not the same anymore. And so now, in essence, I go back and I start doing some of these other things again. I look at the exposure. Does my histogram look okay? But do I need to work on pulling down the highlights a little bit, adding some clarity, doing something with the blacks? Again, it's a constant. It's like a teeter-totter, because when I do one thing, sometimes I have to do something else to compensate for it. I do something with contrast. Now all of a sudden my blacks, they're an area that goes way too black. So I'm constantly juggling that and playing with it, going back and forth. I still do the post-crop vignetting, but if you look here, you're looking at the dehaze, and I cranked it up to plus 30 on the dehaze and got that background. Here's where I think the capturing in color just makes it so much, in many ways, better in terms of doing black and white, because I can go in there now and you can see that, I showed you what I came up with, but those were all at zero when I opened it up. And I'm playing with, the blues, and the only color that just doesn't seem to do much change is magenta. But playing with things to, if I take out some blue, the blue sky gets darker, right? If he's wearing something green and I take it out, that gets darker. Or if I boost it up, it gets lighter. So I'm looking at that and playing with, the green in the mountains back there. The adding some yellow or taking some yellow out means the foreground got a little bit darker. But that's what I think is the beauty of using capturing in raw RGB and then making converting it to black and white. And so this is what I came up with, and that's what I wanted. Um, that's the image that I envisioned when he was there with that pipe, smoking that pipe, and this is the way he dressed, right? And so, I thought it was a successful image. And I mean, and that's what I do with all of my, but I'm not doing 100 of them. I'm not doing 200 of them. I'm doing typically 10 to 15 completely different images. I'm not even doing variations of an image. I find the one that works. A lot of people go in Lightroom and they have the star system and they do this star, this. I got one system. It gets 5 stars or nothing, right? So I got 750 images, and then I've got 14 of them that have 5 stars. That's it. That's what I'm working on, right? Doesn't mean I can't go back sometime and do it, but that's my workflow. So then people will say to me, well, how do you print these? And so way back when I was still using film, I saw this process called pizzography to make black and white prints. And so I decided, I took a workshop up in Vermont with John Cohn, who invented this process. And it just convinced me that what I needed to do until digital got to the point where I could capture high quality images digitally was continue doing my film, then do a high res drum scan of that film, and then I printed it using this pizzography. And what is pizzography? We could talk. I went there for a whole week to learn pizzography. But what it is he's created carbon pigment black inks. And he's over a period of time, now he's up to, he can have 9 or 11 shades of black in a printer, depending on the printer you have. Now, this is a system, you can't just put the black inks in and then change it back to color again. When you do this, you've made the commitment for that printer to be using this. But these inks, though, also have different tones. And so for me, the beauty is, back when we were using in the darkroom, you'd buy different black and white papers, and they had different characteristics. And they actually had a different base color to them. And you found the one, again, that was matched what you felt was the type of print you want. Now you can do this by looking at the color of ink you're using and the paper that you're using and you're printing it on. So in this case, picture we probably all know of Migrant Mother, but it's printed on the same paper, but with different ink sets. And, to me, when I went to John's workshop, I wanted to find an ink set that matched the black and white prints silver gelatin prints I was making in the darkroom. I did a little bit of selenium toning. I was using Oriental Seagull paper, and I brought those prints with me, and I found an ink combination and paper combination, and that's what I use. I don't try different papers. I don't try different inks. To me, this is just sort of the workflow of getting a printout, and I'm not playing with different color papers or different color inks. But I think that's the beauty. Now, we all know that you get an HP, a Canon, an Epson, that you can make really nice black and white prints with the black inks that they have. They just print that, right? And they are nice. They are. And this might not be something that you want to get involved with, right? Because to me, it was sort of like the zone system and doing the testing and all this stuff. But for me, I did this so that I did all that to get to a point where I had a closed loop process that I knew what my print was going to look like when it came off of my computer. And yeah,
One of these images represent the one you wound up choosing?
uh, yes, the bottom left, selenium. Yeah,
That's the one.
yeah. But yeah, you can see though how, it changes contrast. It gives you a whole different feeling, right? And then you think about that's just one paper. Then there's, hundreds of papers now that we can use. The process is that you have your ink cartridges that are refillable. So you buy the inks and you've got a syringe and you can use them. My system has ink bottles with tubes that go over so that I just refill the tubes and it puts it into the printer, right? But you can there's any printer you can think about, there's a system for that. So if you look up Pizzography, you can see that. The other part of this is calibration. Calibrating your monitor. I don't know how many of you calibrate your monitors, but I mean it's essential to do this, right? And in a sense, in doing what I'm doing, sort of this closed loop, it's not just doing a monitor calibration, but if you look on the right, there's these patches of color. I mean, when I do it with the Pizzography, it's patches of black, grays, right? Different grays. And so you've got your paper, you've got your ink, then you use this to profile the densities of those that give you a profile for your printer to use so that when you look at something on the monitor, that's how it's going to come out on your paper. And I got to tell you, I've seen when I've been doing this a 1 point change I've been able to do and see that on the print. The other thing though I do is I've got a viewing box, right? And so this sets next to my monitor so that when I do a print, I can stick it up underneath there and I can compare it here to the monitor. Is it matching, right? Do I need to change it a little bit here or there? The other thing that this viewing box is great for is that for me, if I'm going to have work in a gallery, I go and measure the quality of light in the gallery, the color of light and the intensity of light. And then I can take that box and I can dial that in essentially so that the prints I'm making in my dark room or my light room are going to look the same when they get into the gallery, as opposed to all of a sudden they have some bright light or the light is really dark, right? So again, that's getting really, really picky, but that's what I do. Sort of going to end some of this just with, I had my work published in Lenswork on the Silo City, but I also had a project, a 16-year project that I call Against the Grain, was actually published in Lenswork before that. And that work, it's all done in film, I'm in the process right now of putting it together as a book in a major exhibition up in New York. I started this project in 1989, and it's finally in 2025 going to be published and exhibited. These guys that you see over here are called grain scoopers. They in Buffalo, New York. I was teaching at the University of Buffalo, and these guys were using technology that was invented in 1845 to unload grain boats coming across the Great Lakes. And when I got there in 1989, they were still using that technology. And so I started that project. Then I said to myself, where does the grain come? And, it came from Kansas. So I spent a couple summers on a wheat farm in Kansas with a family, photographing that part of the process. This guy's he works at one of the small grain elevators. Then I went up to Duluth, Minnesota, because that's where the grain would get loaded and come across the Great Lakes to Buffalo. So I did a round trip across the Great Lakes from Duluth to Buffalo and back and photographed. And then finally at the end, in 2007, these guys were replaced by self-unloading boats, which I knew that was going to happen. And that's why I did the project. I actually did two master's degrees on this project, doing research and writing and interviewing. The work is been purchased and is in the permanent collection of the George Eastman Museum. And in October, it is going to be at the Birchfield Penny Art Center, which ironically, 2025, this all started with the digging of the Erie Canal, and the guys that were doing the grain, their ancestors actually were the Irish guys that hand dug the canal across New York State. So in October 2025 will be the 200-year anniversary of opening of the Erie Canal. Yeah, like most photographers, I have a website, so it has all different types of imaging that I do, and I also offer I do a mentoring program. Photographers come to me, whether it's a group of prints and they want some feedback, or it's a project, they want some feedback on how to put it together, or they might want a book. They're doing a book and they want me to help them arrange and put together the book. So I do that also. And that's it. That's where you can get a hold of me. If
What
you,
do you do in your spare
um, when I found photography, I I got out of school when I was 20 years old. It was a 2-year associate degree, and I said to myself a couple things. One of them was I knew that if I lived to be 100, I'd never be as good as I wanted to be in photography. And I don't mean good, meaning I'm better than you. It was really the competition within myself to constantly learn and grow as a photographer. And I knew, who could have predicted digital, right? I don't use anything that any piece of equipment that's the same that I used when I was in school, right? And so I'm constantly, my life is photography, really. I have friends that are photographers, but they play guitar or they do woodworking and right. I mean, and there's all kind, and it's like, and there's nothing wrong with that because they love doing it, right? For me, it's like, and I think about that Bonnie Raitt song, Nick of Time, it's like time gets more precious when you realize there's less of it to waste, right? And so, for me, a lot of what I'm doing is actually archiving my work and looking at work I mean, I started my own company in medicine, an imaging company, right? And if anybody's ever started a company, those are 14, 16-hour days. It's, FDA clearance and all this stuff, right? And so, but I continued to photograph, but I didn't do anything with it. So I've got these projects, I've got other projects, but I've also got work that's there that, I haven't seen. And I don't know if you know the photographer Vivian Meyer. Yeah, yeah. It's my motto is I don't want to be the next Meyer. I don't want to die and have my stuff bought at some storage auction of my negatives, right? Oh, it is. It is. It's a truly incredible story, um, and a close, huh? In black and white, right? And when you think about it, when you look at her contact sheets, again, she didn't have a lot of money, and she didn't to either buy film or a lot of those. I mean, most of her work was like one exposure. It wasn't she was doing, So yeah, I mean that's what yes, with her waist level Rolleiflex or whatever it was. So yes, I honestly, I've been in photography for 50 years, and I've sort of made the decision that other than when I'm on Sky and I'm there doing the workshop or just we're there living and we're out and I've got my camera, I'm, photo here and there of some project that I need to get another image for that I've been thinking about. Because, I mean, I write down things of where I want to go. I saw something, it's in the middle of winter, but I need to be there in the summer when the sun's over here. Other than that, I'm really spending my time, going through my work and doing this book. You have no idea. I mean, it's like a 210-page book and this exhibition of 75 photographs. You just like have no idea how much, time and energy you've got to put in to make that happen, and that included getting the funding to get it, you know, published.
Things that aren't photography.
Things that I do that aren't photography. Oh, you mean to have to do? Yes. But I mean, I think in my life, I've done things like I volunteered for this organization of ophthalmic photographers. It was an international organization, and so the guys that came before me started it, and so then they taught me because that's the only way you could learn how to do it. And so then I said, well, I need to give back, so I'm going to volunteer. And I ended up being the president for 4 years, right? But I did, I was the publisher of the newsletter. I ran meetings, and I was doing it because I wanted to give back. Little did I know how much that was going to play into, number one, teaching workshops and doing things, especially when social media came out, and then running my business. I had to learn how to run a business and all those things that I didn't, I wish I could say I was smart enough to think I'm going to do this because I'm going to get something out of it. But in the end, I did, from that. Yeah.
Back in it gave.
Exactly. I mean, which is, typically what happens in life. Yeah.
Only irises.
Any questions? Any questions on Zoom?
They're asleep.
Oh.
Those irises actually they started with Merck Pharmaceutical, made a glaucoma drug. And somebody had photographed a close-up iris on a National Geographic story on vision. And the iris was on the front cover. And they came to me and they said, we want to do a calendar. And each month is going to be a different iris. Okay. And they commissioned me. I did it for 4 years. Yeah, that was a very, very lucrative, I mean, I wasn't being a commercial photographer, but because I had the equipment and none of those irises, there's nothing wrong with them. They're all normal irises. It was just finding people with.
Is that like every member of your family?
No, I don't. No, it wasn't actually any member of my family. I would just meet people, people I knew at the hospital or people I would just meet. And I'd say, and I had the equipment at my house. It's a big piece of equipment to photograph that, but it would just be, can I, explain what I was doing? I didn't have anybody say no. And I did a lot of them, and then the advertising agency would go through them and then pick which ones they wanted for each month. And then actually they ended up printing it around the world. I did a contract for the US, then all of a sudden South America wanted it, then Japan wanted it. So one of those crazy things that you don't ever plan on.
Don't anticipate.
No.
Well, thank you very much. I really like how you showed the sliders in Lightroom with black and white, because I've talked to a lot of people that don't have any idea what those sliders do in black and white. And so I'm always teaching them how that works.
That's key.
The tonal contrast you can change by sliding those, and they're like, oh, it's a light coming on moment for them.
That's the key. I mean, exposure and all that, but that's the key to the black and white is playing and showing how that, I mean, does something in your photo like match because of density, and now can I use the slider
To make them change.
Make them change?
Mhm.
Right. I mean, that is.
And to be honest, when I first started doing them in Lightroom and that was there, it made me realize to see that more in the field, to realize this scene isn't going to work in black and white because everything is the same color. There's no,
Here,
yeah.
that's this. It's
And
really this.
For me, it's just
I mean,
eyeballs. They
you
just,
could get this for probably $15
Yeah.
on eBay. And it's the best, if you're gonna do black and white, it's the best investment that you can make.
that's awesome.
You know,
I like it.
Um,
Now I'm probably gonna have to go buy one. I'll blame you. My wife will be upset with you
I
about it.
already made a note, I'll let you know where I find it.
Okay, you do that.
Really, I think you just checked like last week and there was one or two on eBay.
Well, Adorama's got a new one for $55.
Right, but-
We'll have to check eBay.
Yeah, we'll
But
look.
this is a zone 6, so this is a used older one.
Yeah.
Which, yeah.
Well, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing with us. For everybody in the room and on Zoom, remember next month, photo review, black and white. That was
Stay home.
planned. Yeah, you get to stay home with your favorite beverage of choice in your favorite easy chair. We'll do a photo review. Hopefully, I'll have an announcement for who that photo review judge will be before June 1st. So thank you, everyone, for coming out. Our biggest group in the building of the year. So we can thank Mark for that.
Thank you for having me.
If anyone wants to go to dinner, they can. I cannot tonight, unfortunately. So everyone on Zoom, thank you for being here, and we'll see you later.
Thank you. I sent you a message, Travis, on the chat.
Okay, I'll look at it.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.
I'm interested in your next book.
Oh, the great ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I grew up on the St. Lawrence River, so I didn't see the big 1,000-footers. They couldn't make it now. But I've gone to a few locks. I was